I want to start from that side, if you don't mind just doing an introduction, where you're from, and what you'll be contributing to the panel today.
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Antoine Paillusseau. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FCB, originally from France, as some of you may hear, but started this business in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and now we're scaling up to Europe. So that's why I'm here today, but very excited to share my experience.
Thank you, Antoine.
Me, I am Roger Adom. I am coming from Côte d'Ivoire. I work in France and I work in Côte d'Ivoire. I am now Ministry of Digital Economy and Innovation. And for me, it's important to have the bridge and the sharing between Africa and Europe and Africa.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roger.
Hello, I'm Henry Zitzman. I look after Amazon Web Services startup programs. I'm based in Cape Town. It's a really pleasure to be here, and I work a lot about this topic about scaling into Europe and US as well. Thank you.
Lovely to have you.
And hi, Robert Haynie. Introduced myself earlier with FMO, but just to say I am American and based in London, so it's good to be here.
Welcome.
Mohamed Fagiri. I am a African founder from Europe and scaling into Africa.
Fantastic. So say that again. African founder from Europe, scaling into Africa. You got that, right? Fantastic. Welcome. I want to start with one quick quote. And it goes, "If I have ever seen magic, it's been in Africa." And whoever John Hemingway is, it's not the Hemingway we think of. It's so true. If I have ever seen magic, it has been in Africa. For those who've been to that beautiful continent, it just has the magic. So I want to start, panelists, if that's okay, first talking about European startups wanting to scale into Africa. I think we want to start with that topic. We're really going to just put the questions out. Feel free to jump in and respond, and then we will get some questions at the end from the crowd. So I want to start with, if you want to go from Europe into Africa as a startup, it feels like, and I may be wrong, but it feels like there isn't so much appetite for Europe to go into Africa as our African startups and our African ecosystem to come into Europe. What are your thoughts and opinions on that?
So I think if you look at it, usually the European startups are looking to go west, especially to the US. And one of the things that when we start looking, so we are in the identity space. And what we found is the problem that you need to solve is much bigger, and it requires a different way of thinking. And also you have to look, and I will go to what Keith said earlier, we look at Africa as a continent. It's actually, if you think about it, if you are in Europe, especially with the regulation, you can access 27 countries just by being within the European Commission, right, or European Union. Going into Africa, and it's wrong to say the continent, because even if you look at two countries next to each other, you will find that the regulations are different, the requirements are different, and your access to market as well is different. So that in itself a challenge, and you need to understand the markets you're going to and do your proper research. And I think that's the thing that you always need to be aware of when you're accessing the continent, if we can say that word, which I have some reservation about it, yeah.
Yeah, so two different environments altogether. Are there more thoughts from the panel on this, Robert?
Yeah, I agree with that. We're not really seeing a big demand or appetite for ventures scaling from Europe to Africa, and I think because it's difficult, and if other reasons entail kind of issues in terms of like looking at the ag sector. You have very dispersed, farmers, and sometimes there's a lower understanding of tech and how that applies. So I think, yeah, I'd say we see more often perhaps those same ventures looking at other markets, say Latin America or Asia, as being kind of easier to enter into.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Henry, from a corporate perspective, from an AWX perspective, what's being discussed in the corridors, right, from Europe to Africa?
Yeah, I just want to firstly, Kit mentioned it earlier quite well. 54 countries, 2,000 languages. South Africa isn't one thing, and every market is really different. And I've seen a lot of engagements coming from the top startups out of UK, even USA, about entering into Africa, and they adopt a different kind of approach, each one actually. I'm looking, for example, at the likes of ClearScore coming in and saying, why don't we build out a development center in Africa, build up that talent and that approach. And then I see the likes of Stripe saying that they want to come into Africa, and they take an M&A approach with startups, and with Paystack, with a $200 million acquisition approach. And I kind of think that is a very strong thought process, because when you're moving into Africa, you're moving into the African economy, and you want to be part of that economy. So you need to find a very strong balance between, I would say, local ownership, as well as the drivership that you have. So it's not a typical channel kind of ISV approach and just drop down and get moving kind of approach. You've got to do your due diligence, and there's good examples of where it actually is working in that context.
Thank you. Roger, from your perspective, have you seen any successful entries from Europe into Africa, into Senegal?
Yes, there is a lot of success, a lot of big successes. In Côte d'Ivoire, for example, you have the French Tech, in Abidjan, the French company, French startup, set up activities in Côte d'Ivoire, and they build a bridge with the Côte d'Ivoire startup. It's for us, it's really a success, because they work together, and they build together, and they innovate together. This is the good thing, but perhaps the issue can be the legal parts and the regulation, because they need to understand what the country run and what are the big stakes. This is perhaps the issue. And there is the difference between the French-speaking countries and the English-speaking countries, because startups are more appetite for big markets like Nigeria, like South Africa, like Kenya, and it's different when they must go to Senegal, Burkina Faso, because they are small country with small markets. And this is for us the issue, but there is a lot of success.
So from a Côte d'Ivoire perspective, and this is a little bit off topic, but just bear with me. So from a Startup Act point of view, part of the countries who are trying to get startup acts into the countries, there's a very specific focus on getting foreign skill into the countries for different reasons. From a Côte d'Ivoire perspective, what are the requirements for a specific startup to come from outside of the country into the country? How rigorous is it to get into Côte d'Ivoire?
No, they can come. There is no difference between a startup and other companies, no difference at the legal point of view. But there is not today a strong focus on innovation, because we are development countries. We need a bridge, we need the roads, we need the schools, we need the health. This is the issue. The innovation is not a priority for the moment at the point of view. But there is a lot of youngs with good education, and they want to innovate, and they create bridge with a French startup, with a Morocco startup, and there is a bridge between Africa and Africa and Europe. Yeah. But the innovation is not today a priority at the country level. This is the issue.
That's most helpful. Thank you, Antoine.
Just for me, a couple of things. I think the perception of moving from Europe to Africa may seem difficult, but if you think, okay, an European startup that wants to go to the US, it is super hard. You have as many countries, you have as many regulations, access to talent is extremely expensive, very capital intensive. It's much more easy in that sense to go to Africa. For me, the two pain points are, one, when you invest money in Africa, how do you get it back if you have to draw a return? I think the governments have put a number of regulations that are not easy for entrepreneurs that invest in Africa to get their money back at some point. And I think just visa-wise, it is super complicated you want to invest in a business, even at small scale. You want to become a director in a specific market. It is hard to get a visa. It has a lot of conditions, or even the minimum ticket to invest in order to get a visa is already very, very expensive. So I think for me, that's the two main pain points, but talents, amazing talents in Africa, same time zone as Europe, so you don't have this delay in working with a zone like US or Asia, and massive diversity, massive opportunity. The youth of the globe is sitting in Africa, not anywhere else. So yeah.
So what I'm hearing overall, there is a willingness for European startups or from wherever to come into Africa. There's some regulations to get through. There's some strict hurdles to get over in terms of visas, in terms of getting your talent. I just want to ask one follow-up question. So when you think of this, would you ever relocate a whole startup team into a specific country with the challenges of visas and getting people moved?
Okay, so I'm the other side, right?
Yes.
So my whole tech team is in Africa developing product and services for European clients. So the tech team is there already.
Yeah.
So I didn't move tech
around.
talents there. So, but it is definitely one of the biggest challenges, moving people from Europe to talent from Europe to Africa.
Thank you. I wanted to segue into that because we're going to swap it now from Africa going out. So let's start with FMO, if that's okay, Robert. I really want to just talk about. We're thankful to the DFIs. Really, we are. We often don't know where the ecosystem would have been without. And I just want to talk about really in terms of how are you as FMO in this case, how are you seeing the whole early startup stage, the whole scene, funding in Africa, helping, and then helping the growth into the rest of the world?
Yeah, sure. And I think there's a lot of expectations for DFIs in this space, right? So I think it's important to talk about, well, what is our role? And I think, just as other investors are looking, we are looking for that return, right? And so that's why historically we've played more in that PE and later stage SME space. But of course, as you're seeing the trend, DFIs going upstream, doing more of this work. But I think it's important to remember that DFIs also have that impact lens. And so, where can we be additive in a way that other investors cannot, right? So we have sometimes the same challenges and return expectations, but also we have a bit more patient capital, and sometimes it comes with different kind of priorities, right? So for instance, we do have a lot of, not a lot, I should say, but this technical assistance capital, right? And that's what we're really focusing our ecosystem building work from. And so how we've been looking at our role is, where are the next and the new, rising ecosystems that we can be additive and supportive, right? Where we can help catalyze other investors to look at those markets and perhaps, serve as a bit of that first loss capital or more risky investment to encourage that. So yeah, that's really why on our ecosystem building strategy, we're looking at these more kind of middle tier markets, right? And as I mentioned, earlier before this panel was, we've prioritized Ghana, perhaps a bit more obvious as one of those that is up and coming, but Tanzania and Morocco, so that we can hopefully help encourage and focus a bit more investment in those countries.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Are there any, from the panelists, any comments or feedback specifically as it relates to DFIs and their role? The one very important one is we want more European investors into Africa. Can we see, by show of hands, just in the crowd, any European investors in the room today, specifically? Because we will come ask you for money for Africa, for sure. Fantastic. But any thoughts on how else DFIs can maybe help getting talent into Africa, getting money into Africa? Because we always just look at them, but they can also we can look at their networks. Any thoughts from the panel?
Well, I always look at the wonderful Maxime data, and I look at this up-and-coming new percentage, 4% deep tech, and I'm seeing the likes of Arm stepping up and building up innovation centers suddenly, and really reaching out there asking, who's going to join us on that journey to build the next deep tech industry across Africa? And then you think, why is deep tech pretty much stuck in Cape Town, around the 4 universities and a bit in Johannesburg? And why is it not coming up in Nigeria or even Tanzania, where these wonderful universities are? So I think the DFI has got a fantastic opportunity to make a real big impact in Africa. And in a way, also, you've got these wonderful, vibrant venture capital firms that really are very good at identifying talent. You've got very strong local accelerators, not somebody from the USA running an accelerator. You've got Grindstone, as an example, running an accelerator for 40 startups year on year for the past 4 years. Wow. So you've got these really great opportunities out there to put your foot down and say, let's go into this field that's going to drive the next R&D, the next, I don't know, ARM processes and the deep tech stuff like that. Satellite tech, the potential in that for an African continent is just huge, of course, from a connectivity point of view. And there's so many areas that I think you can definitely add value. You just break down the barriers, which is essentially, transport, logistics, anything that's the real stuff, the stuff that we don't, as in Europe, have to worry about, having internet, as an example. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's about cementing it and just getting that out there in the right way. Because if you look at also where the startups are, then you look at the countries, Lagos, Nigeria, unicorns, and in Kenya, and then you look at South Africa and Egypt, and Tunisia is coming up. But then Morocco, Rwanda, Tanzania, next to Kenya. And that is that cement that's going to make this continent's 54 countries drive the next innovations going forward. And probably from that, you'll start seeing very big, I would say, mergers and acquisitions coming in from European institutions into the continent, which is exactly what we need to drive CVCs.
Fantastic. And I really wanted to let that conversation go a little bit, because there's a saying that we always have, you probably know it very well, but it takes an ecosystem to raise a startup, right? And that ecosystem really goes for all of us. And it's, we're 54 separate countries, but we have to just work this one at a time. One entrepreneur at a time will change the world. I want to ask, Antoine, both you and Mohamed, just talk to us. What are your biggest concerns about your scale into Europe? And just talk us through that. And for the other startups in the room, what's uppermost in your mind? You're far down the thought process of how you're doing this into application of it. Just talk to us a little bit about that. For the panel, we've got about 5 minutes to go, then we'll go to Q&A.
Sure. So one of the things that when you're looking into scaling either way is, first of all, the solution that you have to provide, you cannot actually copycat a solution from whether Europe and moving it into addressing the problems that you're facing in the continent. And also the business models that you have to adopt, that you have to reinvent to be able to scale, to be able to serve the communities there. And we have to think outside of the box. And even if you look at it historically, like I was in a dinner last night with few founders, and one of the things that came up, why are we building concrete houses in Africa? If you look at it from taking it even way back to 20, 30 years, we're always coming with the mentality that let's take something that works in one place and let's try to build that or push that as it is and bring it in. Right, that definitely you have to go in, whether you're moving south to north or north to south. You have to be very mindful of the challenges, the different business models, the different way of thinking, and reinvent the wheel.
Thanks, Antoine. Thank you.
On my side, I would say access to funding. So for an African startup wanting to develop in Europe, it is capital demanding. And convincing European investors that the African tech can work in Europe it's a big challenge. €1 of revenue in Africa is not the same as €1 in revenue in Europe. So raising is really, for me, the top of my mind. And the strategy we adopted is trying to convince a couple of clients before raising capital. So getting this foot on the door in certain market to say to investors, yes, we're still generating 70% of our revenue in Africa, but 30% in a year managed in Europe. And that's how we want to prove to investors that we are a African and European business that is growing, and hence the scale. But access to funding is very, very complex. In Africa, it's really an investors market. Very few investors, a lot of startups. So investors set the term, the timing, and so on. It's a little bit different in Europe. There's much more dynamism in the space, and we want to try to serve that way. But it's a challenge. Access to talent is a challenge.
Yeah. So access to markets, access to talent, access to funding, still the same three, Robert?
Yeah, I just want to maybe add to that and say, yes, there are a lot of issues, and it's tough for tech-enabled businesses to scale to Europe. But I think we are seeing perhaps the more pure-play tech models that are scaling, right? So like remote sensing technology, AI, and there is a lot of innovation that we are seeing that are homegrown solutions, homegrown models on the continent that are, we're investing in. So, for instance, one in our portfolio, Aerobotics, is using aerial technology for ag, and they've successfully scaled. So I think there is the opportunity there, and we really like to look and see how the models are emerging on the continent, and like you were saying, in terms of how they are kind of customized for those markets, but then perhaps being opportunistic to help them scale to new markets.
I love that. Roger, if you have any closing thoughts, I'm always very aware when we do a panel to give everybody equal chance to speak. I would love for you to have some closing thoughts on this discussion on scale.
Okay, thank you to allow me to conclude and to close, because it was a very useful and interesting discussion. What I can say, because I am living in Côte d'Ivoire and I'm living in Africa since a lot of years, and I live in France, in Europe, a lot of years also. In Africa, there is a lot of talent, but perhaps there is difficulties for European country or European company or European investor to come to invest in Africa, and more to come to invest in French-speaking Africa, because as say, it's easy to go to invest in Nigeria because it's a big market. Egypt is a big market, South Africa also. But small country like Senegal, like Burkina Faso, like Côte d'Ivoire, it's not the same thing. And the French-speaking country, don't forget this country, because they are a very wonderful country with a lot of talents. But there is a lot of bridge and the scaling from France and the French-speaking country because of the history. But Africa is Africa. And I am sure that the French-speaking country must be at the same level that English country, and because there is also a lot of talent, and we must organize this thing, because come to invest also in the French-speaking country like Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal, because for me it's very important, because there is a difference between these countries, and we need also investors and scaling to Africa and scaling also to Europe, because there is a lot of success of the Senegalese or Côte d'Ivoire company startup go a lot of things in Europe.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And on that, we conclude with this panel. We were recently, I think as Christophe mentioned, in Senegal a couple of months ago, and the whole French-speaking Africa for the first time, I have to admit, came to a different level of awareness for me that the language should never be the barrier to the business. Right, we are open for questions. We have time for 2 questions. So that what we did not address, those are the questions we want you to ask. There's a hand up right at the back. there too? Cool. Your name, where you're from, and your company's name. Thanks.
Perfect. First of all, thank you, everybody. That was great. Ethan Hunter from South Africa, part of Immobizyme. We are a protein engineering and protein expression company. Yeah, my major question is aimed at Henry. You briefly mentioned the incubator scene in Africa, and particularly in South Africa, we like to claim that we have some great large incubators that are doing such great work. But in reality, a lot of startups are left behind, and there's a lot more interest for the incubator itself rather than the service it should offer to these startups in order to grow and expand. This gap is very obvious. I'd like to know anyone's thoughts from the panel, what we need to do to meet this issue. Thank you.
Well, since it was addressed to me, yes, so in the past, I would say 5 years, I've seen a slowdown in the incubator output, as well as the success rate, which is really not good. What I do see, though, is a very strong pickup in what I call startup venture studios, which seems to be now the driving engine for a practical incubation program. Because typically what you see, now I'm going to take an example, Port Elizabeth, yeah, that's the east of South Africa. It's like a province area. There's not much wine there, but beautiful surf area. There's an incubator called Propeller. It's a business incubator, and this is lifestyle business, but in that there is 1 or 2 startups that has the propensity and potential to get into an accelerator going forward. So your measurement of success on an incubator has to be very realistic. That said, I think the programs are very long. 2 years to incubate a output, an MVP, is too long, right? And then if you start analyzing the driving challenge there, these are business founders. So when I go around Africa and I run startup days, and I meet 2,000 startups from Lagos, Accra, Ghana, South Africa, Joburg, Cape Town, 80% have an idea, but they've not built it. So then the issue is actually the digital divide, which says that we need to drive very hard on digital skilling up of early stage students and drive that agenda as a strong agenda across the continent, which will then again solve the problem. You can't solve all the problems at the same time. You've got to basically work on all the chisels, as they say. So that's just my thought. Let's put a lot of focus on EdTech. Let's put a lot of focus on cloud skilling up. We're very lucky. We've got Marine here. She runs a program called Restart, which helps anybody get cloud certified in 12 weeks. Wow. That's epic. It didn't exist a year ago. Cool.
Fantastic. That was a great question. And then talking with my accelerator hat on from a Grindstone perspective, we also look the other way, to your way, right, and think if we see a startup go from incubator to incubator to incubator to accelerator, we often get to a point where we ask them, are you in the business of incubation and acceleration programs or in the business of business, right? So my advice would just be make sure that as you go through our programs, you go always one step up from program to program so that you learn as the mandate of the program grows. But it greatly helps with access to knowledge, access to networks. But I encourage all the startups in the room to also do that outside of the incubators and accelerators, because your networking work never stops. Thank you. That was a great question. We had another question there, and I'm sure then we will have to wrap, right, Christoph? Oh, okay, cool.
Thanks for a very interesting discussion. I'm Tero Ylönen from a startup called Line of Finance in Tanzania. We are 3 co-founders, 1 from Tanzania and 2 from Finland. And we've originally mixed local expertise to international expertise. which has been quite significant benefit in attracting local partnerships and private investors in Tanzania. How do you see this kind of setup? Is it something that we should accelerate or support or advance more to be able to build successful ventures?
Who wants to take that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Robert, you go. You go.
Yeah, look, there's no one right way, but I would say generally it can be good to have a mix of co-founders, having one that is perhaps more based in market on the continent with that local understanding, but working with, if it's not a co-founder, but another, partner to help them in leveraging more skills, understanding, investment from abroad. So yeah, I think that can be a very good model. I'd say one thing that is important is that local understanding. And so having someone, if not the founder, but a key person as part of that leadership who is based there or understands those markets, I think is a key lens that we like to apply.
Fantastic, thank you. Just before we give the panel a round of applause, can we all stand up? Thank you. And I want you, as startups or startup ecosystem players, it really doesn't matter. You're all here for the reason of loving startups and loving the ecosystem and believing that we truly are going to change our beautiful African continent, one startup at a time. Give yourselves a round of applause. Woohoo! Thank you, panel. Really appreciate it.